There is a lake in Manitoba that changes its color in real time before your eyes, flipping from deep turquoise to milky blue within a single afternoon. Not in Iceland or Patagonia, but in the Canadian prairies, people think they already understand. If a lake can rewrite itself at noon, imagine what the other 49 facts will do to your picture of this province. Ready? Let's start. Part 1. Arctic logic that should not be real. 1. Where polar bears commute through town. Churchill sits where tundra kisses tidewater, so each autumn hungry bears pace the shoreline waiting for Hudson Bay to freeze, then stroll past porches like shift workers punching in. Problem bears are held in a fortified hangar nicknamed the Polar Bear Holding Facility, fed minimal rations so they do not imprint on town before helicopter release. A northern settlement runs on bear time, not clocks. Survival has visiting hours, nightly. 2. The beluga whale bottleneck. Because the bay is shallow and sun-warmed in July, thousands of ghost white belugas funnel into the Churchill River estuary to calve and shed skin in freshwater, chirping through a milk blue aquarium you can almost read by ear. Kayaks drift through families while tides reverse the river, and sonar clicks bounce off silt like rain on tin. The prairies end in whales, improbably. Grain and cetaceans share a harbor seamlessly. 3. Aurora like a nightly drumbeat. Meanwhile, the sky conducts its own migration. Churchill sits under the auroral oval, logging 300-plus aurora visible nights in many years, so green curtains fold and refold with clockwork regularity. Charged particles spiral along magnetic field lines, collide with oxygen at roughly 100 to 300 kilometers up, and paint the dark with electron handwriting. The show is normal enough to schedule tours around it. Night becomes a living roof frequently. 4. The coast that's rising out of the sea. Even so, the shore does not stay put. After the Laurentide ice sheet melted, the crust began to rebound. Along Hudson Bay, uplift still raises land at about a centimeter a year, launching new beaches like annual additions. Old strand lines march uphill behind young ones, muskeg drains, and reef surface where charts show only water. Manitoba is gaining ground without a bulldozer. New coasts appear like calendar pages, steadily. By the way, videos like this take weeks of research, long nights of writing, and a painful amount of editing. If you value this kind of work, support it, like the video, and subscribe. 5. The desert that isn't a desert. On the Assiniboine's ancient floodplain, Spirit Sands at Spruce Woods moves in golden tatters, a living dune field built from the silt of vanished Lake Agassiz. The place bakes to desert-like heat and hosts hog-nosed snakes and skanks, yet annual precipitation exceeds desert thresholds, so botanists call it an anomaly. Wind sorts grains into ripples, then flings those ripples into hills. Climate says no. Geomorphology answers, "Watch me," defiantly. 6. A lake that changes color in real time. Little Limestone Lake may be the planet's most spectacular marl lake. As sunlight warms shallows, dissolved carbon dioxide degasses, increasing pH and triggering calcite to precipitate onto suspended particles. The water flips from deep turquoise to milky robin's egg blue within hours. Breezes reverse the chemistry and the palette fades back. It is a chemistry set the size of a valley, and it repaints itself at noon. Color equals reaction, visibly. 7. Fossils from the seaway that swallowed the prairies. As a consequence of that ancient water, Morden's Canadian Fossil Discovery Center houses Bruce, a 13-meter Tylosaurus from the Cretaceous Western Interior Seaway, an apex hunter that patrolled a salt ocean where wheat now grows. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and ammonites slide from shale like illustrations torn from a textbook. The prairies were seedbed long enough to leave teeth. Land forgets slowly, but stone remembers sharply. 8. The snake's megamuster. What many did not see coming is that the world's largest snake gathering happens on cool limestone north of Winnipeg. At Narcisse, tens of thousands of red-sided garter snakes overwinter in karst pits. In spring sunlight, they pour out, knotting and writhing mating balls on thawed rock. The spectacle smells of musk and damp stone, and the highway posts seasonal snake crossing zones. A prairie province hosts a serpent carnival annually. 9. Canada's deepest meteor lake. West Hawk Lake is perfectly round because it is a buried impact crater blown into Precambrian shield. Later ice carved the bold deeper to about 115 meters, making it Manitoba's deepest lake. Divers drop through clear layers to overhanging cliffs of shattered granite, while lake trout patrol the thermocline. A fireball built the basin, then glaciers finished the sculpture. Fresh water wears an extraterrestrial fingerprint indelibly. 10. A waterfall you have to earn. The Grass River knots itself into ledges and black spruce, and there Quasichawan Falls drops roughly 14 meters in tannin-stained foam, the province's highest. There is no parking lot crescendo. You reach it by paddle strokes, portages, and wet boot miles, the way traders and trappers did when the river was freight. Manitoba hides its loudest water behind effort on purpose. Sound rewards work, not wheels. 11. The inland sea with ocean-sized moods. Lake Winnipeg stretches 416 kilometers end to end, a storm factory with fetch long enough to build square-shouldered waves that slam beaches like ocean surf. Seaches slosh water between north and south basins, raising lake level here while lowering it there within hours. Fishermen study wind like stock charts and know when to hug lee shores. A prairie lake behaves like a sea, repeatedly. Inland does not mean gentle, ever. 12. A floodway that outdug everything but a canal. Winnipeg sits on a flat, glacial lake bed with a river that insists on overflowing northward into ice. To stay, the city cut a second river around itself. Duff-Roblin's Red River floodway reroutes peak flows through a 47-kilometer man-made channel so large only the St. Lawrence projects moved more earth in Canada. It has saved billions in avoided damage and preserved a capital's continuity. Civilization here includes a spare river strategically. 13. A floodway that outdug everything but a canal. Winnipeg sits on a flat glacial lake bed with a river that insists on overflowing northward into ice. To stay, the city cut a second river around itself. Duff-Roblin's Red River floodway reroutes peak flows through a 47-kilometer man-made channel so large only the St. Lawrence projects moved more earth in Canada. It has saved billions in avoided damage and preserved a capital's continuity. Civilization here includes a spare river, strategically. 13. A river that flows the wrong way. The Red River runs north into colder country, so spring melt arrives from the U.S. while downstream ice clings to banks. Ice jams stack like plates, water piles into fields, and the map redraws itself in days. Floods become a seasonal language, and every township learns its dialect. In Manitoba, gravity isn't wrong, timing is. The calendar, not the slope, writes risk. Part 2. Ghost Seas, Moving Lands, and Lost Worlds. 14. The Ghost of a Super Lake. Glacial Lake Agassiz once covered up to 440,000 square kilometers, a freshwater giant that, at times, exceeded all modern Great Lakes combined. Its raised strand lines still rim farm fields like ancient shore roads, and the Carberry and Brandon sandhills are fossil surf sculpted by winds that arrived centuries late. When catastrophic outflows rerouted about 8,200 years ago, climate records show a global cooling pulse. Today, combines roll where waves reared. Shorelines outlive water, stubbornly. 15. A national park as a lone island of hills. Riding Mountain National Park is not a mountain but a high escarpment, an elevated lobe of till and bedrock lifted above the prairie by the retreat of Agassiz. It creates a rain shadow edge and cooler nights, so elk bugle in September fog and gray wolves trail moose through trembling aspen. From Wasagaming, the prairie below looks like sea level through conifers. Height becomes habitat overnight. The island is altitude, disguised. 16. petroforms that map sky and story. In White Shell Provincial Park at Bannock Point, Anishinaabe petroforms, arrangements of boulders on lichened granite, trace turtles, serpents, and star paths set to solstice light. Some alignments point to the Pleiades or the Milky Way's river, embedding celestial calendars on the shield itself. Elders still teach here because knowledge never left. The land is the blackboard and the chalk is stone. Astronomy kneels to ground truth deliberately. A marsh that fuels hemispheres. Oak-Hammock Marsh, co-managed by Ducks Unlimited and the province, is a refueling stop where 300,000+ snow geese and tens of thousands of pinetails, gadwall, and shovelers stage each spring and fall. Banding stations and radar counts turn bird thunder into data, while muskrat huts stitch channels into winter towns. Winnipeg sits barely 30 minutes away, yet migration makes this prairie basin continental. Wings set the schedule here. Timetables arrive on wind, loudly. 18. A hydro ghost town in the woods. The old Panawa Dam, completed in 1906, once powered early Winnipeg through turbines spinning on the Winnipeg River's precise head. When greater stations rose upstream, Panawa was decommissioned and left to the moss. You walk arches, view bays where penstocks roared, and listen to rapids melt the concrete back to river. Hydropower became archaeology without losing energy. Industry leaves bones behind, eloquently. 19. The carbon vault you can walk on. The Hudson Bay lowlands form one of Earth's largest peat complexes, storing gigatons of carbon and waterlogged moss where decomposition slows to a crawl. Each step on spongy sphagnum compresses centuries of captured atmosphere. Each permafrost lens guards a freezer full of climate. Woodland caribou pick their way through lichen, and dragonflies hunt over black pools that mirror sky. Break the crust, release a century. Cold guards the vault, fiercely. 20. A deep-water Arctic port in the prairies. Churchill's Port, opened in 1931, is Canada's only deep-water Arctic seaport connected to the grain belt by rail. Boxcars of hard red spring wheat cross muskeg, permafrost sags, and trestles to reach saltwater. Then freighters thread Hudson Strait toward the Atlantic. The line endures washouts and thaw to keep a prairie province plugged into the world. Rail to Wales is an ordinary sentence here. Geography becomes negotiation, constantly. 21. The town that lost its road to the rest of Canada. There has never been a highway to Churchill. Access is by train, air, or sea. When flooding knocked out the rail line in 2017, grocery prices spiked, medevacs multiplied, and communities felt the margin between isolation and connection like a bruise. Repairs restored the corridor in 2018, and the lesson stuck. Logistics is a lifeline this far north. Distance sets rules here, daily. 22. Beaches made of ancient seafloor silk. Grand Beach on Lake Winnipeg's east shore heaps some of North America's finest freshwater sands into white dunes held by marram grass. The grains are remobilized silt from the bed of extinct agassiz, resorted by longshore drift into crescents that squeak underfoot. Lifeguard towers watch a horizon that looks oceanic, yet the water is sweet and inland. Prairie performs as coast convincingly. The sea left props everywhere. 24. When the forest is one organism in disguise. Trembling aspen across southern Manitoba often clones itself by root suckers. So what looks like 1,000 trees can be one genetic individual spreading after fire. Leaves tremble silver because petioles are flattened like oars, turning micro breezes into chorus. Herbivores eat a stand. The root waits and resurges. Counting trunks misses bodies underground. One system, many stems, quietly. 25. The river that teaches lightning to carve wood. Along sandy cutbanks of the Red, lightning sometimes fuses quartz grains into fulgurites, glass tubes branching like roots. Erosion later unveils them as brittle wands, the precise shape of a strike frozen in place. Farmers and riverwalkers find them after blowouts, then watch them crumble in a thumb press. Storms sign their names. Water files the archive. Weather sculpts, then erases, patiently. Part 3. Cold cities, burning skies, and living ice. 26. A garden with no border at all. The International Peace Garden sits like a thesis on the 49th parallel. Its formal beds, bell tower, and lakes cut cleanly by the line that divided Rupert's Land into two nations. Visitors pass Canadian and American customs outside the grounds, then wander inside a zone where flags share pedestals and the boundary is a thin bronze seam through soil. Horticulturists swap spruce tips, bees cross citizenship without noticing, and bagpipers step in and out of countries mid-tune. In a century that learned to fear lines, this one grows roses across it. Sovereignty exhales here, gently. 27. Booming ice that sings like a drum. When Arctic high pressure sits over Lake Winnipeg and the night radiates heat to the stars, the surface plate contracts until something gives. A hairline crack scribbles across black ice, then a rifle shot boom rolls for miles as the sheet relieves stress and throws up a pressure ridge white as salt. A beat later, pinging harmonics skate along the fracture like coins on glass. Anglers freeze in mid-step, listening to physics in surround sound while the aurora walks the horizon. The lake is not quiet in winter. It becomes percussion. The ice keeps time out loud. By the way, this kind of deep dig content is not recycled. It costs time, energy, sources, and sleep. Help keep it alive. Hit like and subscribe so it can continue. 28. A city famous for wind-carved corners. Portage and Maine is a compass for every Winnipeg story because the air itself accelerates there. Towers focus prairie wind into a canyon that can pill tears from eyes and lay a rhyme on scarves in 30 steps, which is why skywalks knit block to block like climate-controlled arteries. In January, a southwester pushes down the Portage corridor and rebounds off glass at Maine, turning the crosswalk into a bellows. In July, the same corner swats heat out of downtown like a metronome. People from coast cities call it myth until they lean into it. Winnipeg's personality shows up as weather, daily. 29. The Icelandic shore. Gimli's breakwater smells of pickerel and pine tar, and Hekla's serpent-long causeway points toward a limestone island where Icelandic surnames still hang from mailboxes. The Icelandic Dagarin weekend braids chess, skar, and poem recitals with a sailpast of boats that once would have been cod luggers in a different sea. Descendants of the 1870s New Iceland colony rebuilt a North Atlantic village on a freshwater coast so the harbor whistles in winter like Reykjavik, while gulls mob whitefish racks. Viking graffiti hides on picnic tables. A troll statue guards the pier at dusk. Saga migrated west and learned reed beds. 30. The day a jet became a glider. On 23 July 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 burned its fuel math into aviation memory when a ground conversion error between pounds and kilograms left a Boeing 767 dry at altitude. Over flat prairie mosaic, the captain side-slipped to bleed speed, aimed for Gimli's decommissioned military runway, now used for drag races, and kissed down without engine thrust or fatalities, while families watched from a go-kart track. Borrowed runway, borrowed luck, borrowed time, and still the aluminum stopped straight. The prairies once again turned emptiness into margin for survival. A province caught a falling jet with space. 31. Whitewater in a prairie province. East of Grain runs a granite theater where the Winnipeg, Bloodvein, and Barrens rivers step down over pink shield ledges in cool, tea-stained staircases. Canoe bows hammer standing waves, portage trails groove bedrock glossy with a century of tump lines. Thunder rolls through jack pine galleries loud enough to erase thoughts. When the spring freshet comes early, chutes liquefy into aerated hydraulics and eddies boil like kettles. Yet eddy lines still teach rhythm to new paddlers. The cliché of flatness crumbles at the first horizon break. Manitoba stores altitude as water energy, not cliffs. 32. UNESCO in the Boreal. Pimachilwin'aki, the land that gives life, earned its World Heritage status because it proves a cultural landscape can stay whole under modern pressure. Trap lines and travel routes lace black spruce and river corridors. Rice beds feed communities tuned to season. Pictographs stain rock faces where portages begin. And spring burns steward blueberries for bears and people together. Treaties are not plex, but practices, and elders navigate by wind, ripple, and memory like a library with tides. The designation did not freeze a museum. It recognized an engine. Culture and forests sign a pact that renews itself. 34. A place where tides bite hard. For the interior, Churchill turns the interior into estuary the instant the tide swings. A 4-meter bite lifts Hudson Bay into the river mouth like a poured slab, then sprints back across kilometers of glittering flats combed by eelgrass. Belugas ride the flood in a white procession, audible before visible. Bears pad the wrinkled clay in search of stranded fish when the ebb leaves mirrors behind. The smell is salt, kelp, mud, and breath in cold air. Time here is a twice-daily muscle rather than a clock. The coast inhales and exhales like an animal the size of a map. 35. Roads made of winter. When ice hardens across muskeg and shallow lakes, truckers chalk their weight limits and distances on the dash and push supplies north along routes that didn't exist last week. Speed is capped to keep flex waves from slapping the underside of the ice. Convoys space out like tides. Mechanics carry parts for the parts. Then April swallows the highway whole, and communities flip back to airstrips and patience. The ledger of food, fuel, and medicine is written in degrees Celsius and centimeters of clear blue. Infrastructure is not poured and permanent, it is drawn and erased by season. 36. Ancient rock older than multicellular life. North of the 53rd parallel, the Canadian Shield shows its ribs as 2.7 billion-year grainstones and granites that remember oceans without oxygen and continents assembling like rafts. Pillow lavas freeze submarine eruptions into stone loaves, smoky quartz veins stitch fractures with glass, lichens paint maps of moisture in lime and coal. Prospectors, paddlers, and caribou all learn the same grammar of fracture, dip, and lineament because navigation and mining share a language here. Deep time is not an exhibit, it is pavement and tent pad. The ground sets your watch to Archean. 37. Where wolves fish and bears swim. Along the bay's summer edge, black bears slide into kelp beds and come up with mussels crunching like walnuts, while wolves trot the foam fringe, scanning for molting geese, stranded capelin, or seal scent. Inland predators rewrite their cookbooks because tide and tundra overlap like Venn diagrams here, and the pantry swaps berries for blubber without warning. Tracks cross each other on the same gravel bar like signatures on a treaty you can read at dawn. The Borel turns amphibious where salt meets spruce. Adaptation is just breakfast, served cold. 38. A river that runs two colors. At the forks, the chocolate red meets the paler Assiniboine and refuses to mix for blocks. A braided seam you can follow like a ribbon in drone footage after flood season. For thousands of years, traders and families used that color difference as a living signboard. Two waters, two routes, two worlds convening on one eddy. Today, skaters trace that same confluence in winter when the river freezes flat under footbridges and food stalls. Winnipeg's heart is a lesson in accord, painted in silt. Difference remains visible by design. Part 4. Earth that still remembers the ice. 39. A cliff that writes in rust. In the north, banded iron formations bleed red down faces of old shield rock, iron oxides wicking into seeps so that whole outcrops glow like embers after rain. These bands were laid when Precambrian seas inhaled oxygen for the first time, iron capturing that breath as hematite and magnetite before animals had spines. Today, the rust prints river margins and canoe routes with a palate older than bone. Manitoba's geology keeps a red ledger openly. Time paints in iron patiently. 40. Mosquitoes that make weather app headlines. After snowmelt saturates prairie potholes and warm rains arrive, Manitoba's mosquitoes hatch in synchronized pulses that can turn dusk into a moving veil. The joke is continental, but the biology is precise. Standing water plus heat equals emergence, and wind direction decides whether a barbecue survives. Towns tune schedules to breeze charts and ditch grids. Dragonflies patrol like tiny fighter jets at noon. Annoyance becomes ecology you can hear. Weather includes wings here, loudly. 41. The lake that breathes like a lung. Lake Winnipeg does not sit still. Wind setup can push water from one basin to the other, only for it to slosh back as a sage that beaches boats at one harbor while drowning docks at another. Gauges see water rise and fall in hours, a slow inhalation and exhalation driven by pressure and fetch rather than tide. Fishermen read isobars like chapters and move before the slosh returns. A prairie lake practices tide logic, inland. The lung inhales faithfully. 42. Granite that grows gardens. On sun-warmed shield slabs, only a few centimeters of soil wedge into fractures, yet bonsai jack pines twist from the cracks and blueberries pearl in heather mats. Lichen colonizes first, moss follows, then a thin skin of humus allows a stunted forest to stand on pink stone heat sinks. Hikers pick fruit from a garden grown on granite and patience. The forest scales down without losing dignity. Stone wears green stubbornly. 43. A bison comeback on the Parkland Rim. In Riding Mountain and the surrounding aspen parkland, dark humps graze where 19th century bison were erased by market hides and railway rifles. Small herds re-established in enclosures now lean against the fence line like moving hills, while ranches manage plains bison as living heritage outside. Elk bugle in the background as if giving permission. The prairie remembers its architect one herd at a time. Muscle returns to the grass, slowly. 44. A lighthouse marooned in pack ice. At Cape Mary and beaches near Churchill, winter welds Hudson Bay into plates that buckle like collapsing rooftops. And pressure ridges stack ice blocks taller than a person against gun batteries and lighthouses. Onshore wind turns shorelines into blue-white walls you can hear grinding at night beneath Aurora. Spring breaks it with pistol cracks, and pans drift away like departing barges. The coast builds and erases fortresses of water yearly. Land wears armor temporarily. 45. The prairie's hidden sand sea. South of Lake Manitoba, the Carberry sandhills roll under trembling aspen and mixed grass like a buried desert inhaling through roots. These dunes are Agas's old skin, remobilized by wind after forests were cleared and then stabilized again by grass and shrubs. In some hollows, furniture legs sink if you step off trail after a dry spell. Even the flatlands have a secret sea of motion. Sand keeps a quiet pulse, invisibly. 46. Waves that turn to glass and then to knives. In late fall, Lake Winnipeg glazes shores with clear ice armor when spray coats rocks and reeds, turning beaches into chandeliers. A wind shift and temperature drop shatter that glaze into plates that the next surge shoves up the strand like noisy bulldozers, carving borders of silver knives a meter deep. The spectacle looks like vandalism committed by weather. Water writes with still edges here, briefly. 47. A river that runs past petroglyphs you can't see. On certain shield lakes and portage trails, low sun exposes images cut inches from the waterline. Canoes, moose, spirit beings etched into lichen-lined rock that most paddlers glide past unaware. The figures reveal themselves only when angle and light cooperate, a curriculum hidden in glare and algae. Elders point out the scenes and the stories re-enter the channel. Manitoba's routes still carry text. Stone keeps whispering, conditionally. 48. A grain port where whales sing under freighters. In Churchill Harbor, prairie wheat loads into ocean-going hulls while belugas roll and whistle in the same channel. Sonar clicks meeting propeller thrums like dueling orchestras. Grain elevators face tundra, and tide tables share a page with rail schedules. The pairing looks impossible until you realize the province's spine is logistics. A farm handshake reaches a fjord daily. Steel and blubber share water calmly. A province made of sky. South of the shield edge, the horizon lays flat enough that you can watch thunderstorms walk toward you for an hour. Anvil tops glowing pink while the ground stays twilight. Grain elevators and shelter belts become punctuation in a long sentence of clouds. And storm chasers treat grid roads like graph paper. Distance is not empty, it is stage. Light performs at scale here, extravagantly. 50. The super lake, the super ice, and the super lights. Only in Manitoba can you stand on the strand line of Lake Agassiz that once cooled the world, then drive winter roads across living ice to a port where whales meet wheat, then look up at aurora that uses the sky like a loom. The same province that grows bonsai forests on granite and whistles dunes into song also lifts coastline centimeter by centimeter out of the bay. Everything here is a rehearsal for scale. Water acting like ocean, ice acting like stone, and stone acting like page. The last line is not a moral, but a vector. The land is still moving, and the story refuses an ending. However, the quiet engine beneath these scenes is continuity rather than spectacle. Iron bands record the first breath while mosquitoes report this year's rain. The lake sage synchronizes with ice roads that appear and vanish. Granite gardens miniature pines while bison return with full-scale muscle. Pack ice builds battlements and then evacuates them. Dunes inhale through grass while ice exhales knives. Petroglyphs wait for the proper angle. Ships and whales share acoustics, and sky completes the set by making distance visible. As a consequence of this, Manitoba reads like a manual for occupying time as much as space. Economies, routes, and rituals are tuned to forces that predate maps and outlast budgets. Even so, the province keeps adding lines to that manual. New lifts to beaches, new returns of herds, new treaties of stewardship, so that the cold remains tool, not torment, and the horizon remains invitation, not emptiness. The earth here does not remember the ice. It continues the conversation.